Suzanne Siracuse. Welcome to season 2 of my podcast, focused on the future, keys to building a profitable, sustainable, and impactful business. And I'm excited to be partnering with wealthmanagement.com on this. This series will focus on what firms need to embrace to ensure their growth and success for the future. And you'll hear from industry leaders and advisors on what is working for them. Just like in season 1, I have a great lineup of guests in store. And today I'm talking with Anna N'Jie Konte. Anna is the president and director of financial planning for Re-Envision Wealth, where she manages the firm's financial planning, advisory, and operation strategies. She is a proud Puerto Rican Gambian American who is committed to building a firm where access to excellent, values-aligned financial advice is the norm, not the exception. Oh my God, that's fantastic. Welcome, Anna. Thank you so much for being my guest, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And I love that you highlight your heritage in your bio. I think more people should be doing that. That's very, very cool.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I'm super excited to be here. And, I always tell folks that where I come from is just such an integral part of who I am and how I show up in my professional life, obviously in my personal life. And so it's important for me to have that front and center.
I love it. It's a great idea and a great example. So I always like to start out the podcast with learning a little bit about my guest's journey into the wealth management industry. More often than not, people get here by accident. So what is your story?
Yeah, well, mine was certainly accidental. I grew up in a family and a community that did not work with wealth managers because most of us did not have much wealth to manage. And so, when my parents were advising me about career choices, this was never on the list. However, I graduated college, was a bit confused, like many of us, as to what my next steps were going to be and what my path was going to be. I knew that I really wanted to help and have an impact. I knew what my skills were. I was very good with people. I was good at writing and speaking to folks. And, I wavered a little bit. I wandered a little bit, but then ultimately I got a call from a recruiter who was hiring for an administrative assistant role at Alliance Bernstein in New York. And that was my first introduction to wealth management in any form or fashion. And, what is it? 15 years later, here I am.
That's great. So it's just a fluke that a recruiter called. I'm hearing that more often than not. So kudos to some of the recruiters out there that are doing their due diligence and finding some great people to bring into the industry. And your response about the leaving an impact and wanting to help people is right in line with what we're hearing more and more advisors that are coming into the industry, the new guard, are why they're coming in. It's really not about, oh, I want to make money, I want to work on Wall Street. It's really about giving back, helping people, and exposing them to how financial planning can be an integral part, an essential part of establishing wealth and security in retirement.
Absolutely. I think this is the kind of business where if you want to go far, and particularly if you think about younger generations and what they're looking for in their advisor, so you're thinking about Gen X down, they really want someone who understands them on a human level, who is going to speak to them as if they're humans, is going to, point out the holes in their plan or point out areas of risk to them for their financial life. But more than not, they want someone who shares their values and shares their perspective and is bringing that into the financial advisory relationship. I find more and more, and there might be selection bias here, but I find more and more that the prospective clients I talk to, regardless of wealth level, are really looking for someone who they know cares about them and is going to put their best interests at heart, much less than how much of a return can you generate. We don't usually talk about returns at all until we get to an investment recommendation meeting and a risk tolerance assessment meeting. That's months into our financial planning relationship or financial advisory relationship.
Yeah, I think you've hit on some really important points there. I know for me personally, my relationship with our advisor it's really about that personal touch. And it's a team. It's a woman and her son, and they both kind of serve different aspects of the overall plan. And they are involved in almost every major life decision that my husband and I make. And I think that like I will probably never leave her because of that, you know?
Yeah,
And so I think that's a really important area to surface for serving future clients, and current clients, quite frankly. But I want to go
definitely.
back to what you said. You started as an administrative assistant at Alliance Bernstein. So how did you go from administrative assistant to now running and owning your own practice?
Yeah, it's definitely been a ride. I was so focused for a while on just absorbing as much knowledge as I could because when I first walked into Bernstein, it was like it was a whole nother world for me. It was just very eye-opening, very illuminative of so much of what I was not exposed to in the prior like 21, 22 years of my life. And so personally, I just wanted to be on a path to continue to absorb more of that information. So I was always very aggressive about advocating for promotions and switching jobs when I needed to, internally or externally, to be able to learn as much as possible over that time, with the idea that that was going to tremendously benefit me in my own personal life. At the very least, I would be building skills that I had not been taught by my parents and my family in terms of, building wealth and financial stability for myself. With that comes, natural progression of more responsibility and more, exposure to the different career paths that come in our business. And so, my last job was that was what, not 8 years into my career. I was serving as the practice manager for a really successful advisor, and I was doing all of the insurance underwriting, and I was doing all of the or insurance applications, excuse me. I was doing all of the financial plans, and I was really just liaising between all the different pieces of the team, the operations associate and the investment like portfolio manager and the lead advisor who was bringing in the relationships. And that, I guess, planted the seed in me that I could like do my own thing because I had been doing that, manning the fort. The only thing I hadn't really been doing was sales, but I did everything the minute the client was ready to go. And so I ended up starting my own practice with the goal of sharing some of that knowledge, and having more of an impact because at some point in my career, I felt very out of alignment in that I did not feel I was making an impact. I felt I was just helping people who were already way ahead of the curve get even further ahead of the curve and save money on taxes. And that didn't feel very aligned to me. It didn't feel as though I was really sharing this wealth of knowledge that I had in a way that would really make a difference. And so I wanted to start my own practice, primarily focusing on working with women of color.
Wow, that's fantastic. And, just it's similar to like an internship where you're getting on the job training, you're getting exposure to the various roles within firms, those types of things and resources, internships, starting out, at a level where you're getting the exposure to what a financial advisor does, but learning through that process, I think is a really key part to what makes somebody successful in this industry. And I applaud you for specializing in working with women of color. And you actually, I think, said somewhere that you want to rewrite the money stories of women of color. Can you go into that a little bit more? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Definitely. So, Suzanne, I think I'll share a little bit of our one of our client archetypes at Re-Envision. So, the majority of our clients are first gen wealth builders or first gen of some sort. So they might be the first in their family to go to college, the
Mhm.
first generation to be born in America, the first to obtain some sort of professional degree or start earning substantially more than what their family does. And so these are all highly intelligent, highly trained professionals that I work with, but they have no sort of foundation on financial management, financial planning, investing, they really need a lot of help in terms of reframing their relationship to money and reframing their relationship to planning for their future and being proactive around planning for their future. Because, one thing that I know about folks who grow up with, lower income or lower middle income is that a lot of times we're just planning week to week, month to month. We're not in the practice of thinking about what do I want in a year and taking financial steps towards that. What do I want in 3 years? What do I want in 5 years? What do I want 20 years from now? What do I want my kids and my grandkids to have and have access to? That is a skill and a practice that's built over time. And so that's a fundamental part of what I do, is helping my clients reframe that relationship. Beyond that, when you grow up lower income, lower middle income, there's typically a lot of financial trauma that comes with that, and a lot of dysfunctional behaviors and patterns with money that folks continue to perpetuate until they address it. They look at it head on, and they create a concerted effort to work around that. And so a lot of what we do with our clients is understanding what their relationship to money was, understanding what, I guess, seminal moments they have with money throughout their life, so that we can start to make connections with, especially if they're feeling as if they're not taking the right steps financially, or they're putting themselves in a worse position financially, to make the connection between those early memories or those early experiences to the behaviors that they're exhibiting right now. And so by doing that, and my role as the advisor is to help walk them through that, but also to help create systems and processes and accountability that will help counteract those kind of negative patterns that they have.
You brought up so many great things there. I am obsessed with that whole, what are your money memories, and
Mhm.
how did what happened to you as a child impact the way that you think about money now? And there was a really cool assessment that was done. This was, I think, going back 15 years, and it was United Capital at the time had it, and it was called yourmoneymemory.com. And it was, my husband and I both took it, and and it was kind of like, are you motivated by fear, greed, or power, or something like that? And it allowed you to explore why you behave certain ways when certain things happen in your life around money. And it was probably one of the most educational pieces, not just from our own financial benefit, but for us as partners. Like, learned a lot about each other and why maybe he reacts a certain way and why I react a certain way. So having said that, do you use something that allows you to get to that point in like an assessment or something?
Yeah. So I don't use a tool that's public. I have a worksheet that I've created, and questionnaires that I've created for clients with some of these questions. And usually, that's part of the onboarding process for them to not only, gather all their investment account statements and their tax returns and the like, but also to fill this out and really take some time to think about what their relationship is to money, so that I can walk into this with my eyes open, right? Because what happens sometimes as advisors, and I think this is regardless of demographic, whoever you work with,
Yeah.
is we walk into our relationship, we touch the surface level of like what the person's goals and aspirations are. We make recommendations, and then we're blindsided when a couple months later, a client is going AWOL, or is, completely like not sticking to the plan. And I think a lot of it has to do with this piece. And, there's a ton, I know we're going to talk about AI at some point, Suzanne, but there's a ton of talk around AI replacing advisors. And sure, like AI can probably, read technical charts better than I can. It can probably, scan through prospectuses faster than I can in terms of selecting investments. It can, spit out calculations faster than I can as a human. But what it's not going to be able to do is to connect that human element with the actual plan in a way that an advisor can. And so if advisors are thinking about the longevity of their career and the longevity of their practices, it's so important for them to lean into the human element. And it's something that we're not trained in. We're all trained in tax equivalent yield and, market asset allocation, like watching the market, the tax code, we're trained in all that. We're not trained in this human element that I think is going to continue to be more and more required if we are going to have longevity in this business.
Yeah, gosh, the therapist, psychologist, that leaning into that piece of the equation when you're talking to people, again, going into that behavioral science area of incorporating that into the discussions and in what you inevitably recommend to clients and partners. And I'll go right into the AI question because I think this is a great place to kind of talk about that. AI is popping up everywhere. There's a new conference that's going to be dedicated to that. There's so many articles. There's new technologies that are coming out, tech tools for advisors, specifically in wealth management. EY just came out with this pretty substantial research report where they basically say the same thing, like it's AI plus the human touch is like the equivalent of where you're going to have all the success. So
Yeah.
are you using AI now? And if so, like, how are you using it?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, it's early days still in terms of figuring out the best way to do it, but there are lots of tech tools that have been in the industry for a couple of years that I use AI. Holistiplan is one. Tax planning is an integral part of what we do for our clients, especially because we have a lot of clients who are tech employees, and so they have all kinds of complicated stock options, and we work with a lot of entrepreneurs. And so, there's a lot of considerations from a tax standpoint that we are planning for on a multi-year basis. So we use Holistiplan as a way to, quickly get a sense of their financial situation through their tax return. That's done for everybody. We do have a CPA in-house, but she will look at things after it's gone through Holistiplan, and she can kind of dig in a more intentional way after the AI has already extracted a lot of the information for her. Beyond that, I'm also on the advisory council for wealth.com, and wealth.com is an amazing tool that has an AI overlay that will allow advisors to upload clients' estate documents. And this is something we use. You upload the estate documents, it goes through the entire document, highlights any relevant sections of the documents and says, like, here's what's important about this, here who the trustees are and the power of attorney and the successor trustees, so that you don't have to spend hours reading estate planning documents. I used to, this is one of my favorite jobs, but I used to spend hours just reading trust documents and creating graphs for clients that said, like, okay, when spouse A dies, this is what happens. Then this goes to spouse B, and then this part of the trust triggers, and this happens, and these are the beneficiaries, and here are the assets that's owned within that. Wealth does that for you. And this is not like a sales call. It's just thinking about, or a sales pitch. It's really just thinking about how we can make our lives easier to be as thorough as possible as advisors and quickly extract the value that we need for our clients. And those are two tools that I use too. I also use AI for marketing stuff. I mentioned to you earlier that I use Canva a lot for, presentations and slide decks and things like that. Canva has all kind of features. Like, if you're not someone who, is very good at building a slide deck, for example, you can choose other templates and you can change it automatically to your brand fonts, and it'll suggest text improvements via AI and, format improvements via AI. That's all immensely valuable. Instead of taking a day to do a pitch for a prospect, you can do it in a couple of hours. And so I think it's going to continue to grow and evolve and become more sophisticated. But I'm very big on AI because I think, This is a job that is very time intensive if you're doing it right, and labor intensive either for the lead advisor or support staff. And so any way that we can make our lives easier to still deliver the same value or more value or focus more on the things that they really need us to do, the better.
You gave some really great use cases and examples of how I think some of the products and solutions that are out there that are really embracing AI, helping advisors alleviate their use of manual like doing manual tasks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Holistiplan for tax. I know FP Alpha does something similar. Same with for estate and wealth.com, Vanilla. All of those are really in that specialized planning area that is
Yep.
saving advisors like probably so many hours where because they're uploading the tax returns and the healthcare directives and all of that. I mean, that would have taken so long in the past. And then to be able to use some things for marketing and creating presentations, I think those are great examples. And it's just, as with anything with AI, it's the more you do it, the more that it learns your style and gives even better results. But that human element is still really critical to actually explain what it all means, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's just going to continue to be really impactful for our business and for helping us help clients get the best outcome they can.
Yep. I don't think people should be scared of it. I think it's
No.
it's just going to go hand in hand. It's going to be complementary. So that's great advice. Talking about your firm a little bit, you recently merged with another advisor. And I know there are a lot of advisors out there that are contemplating the same thing, right? Do I go it alone? Do I merge? Do I sell? So can you walk us through your process? How did you get to merging with this particular advisor? And what advice or lessons learned do you think is important to share today with our audience?
Yeah, I was at a little bit of an inflection point in my practice, and in my solo firm that I think was pushing me to make some sort of decision as to the direction I was going to take. So, I was at a place where I was onboarding a lot of clients every month. I had a really good kind of pipeline of prospects. But what was happening was most of those really wanted investment management in a way that I was not as focused on. I'm much more of a planning and relationship management type of advisor than I am focusing just on asset management and asset gathering. And I also recognize that I was either going to have to hire somebody internally or bring someone or merge with someone in order to have a more sustainable like offering on that side of things. And so, I have a good advisor network. Luckily, my partner reached out to me and was kind of thinking the same thing, thinking that, he wanted to focus much more on the investment side of things, less on the advisory side of things, and was getting a lot of institutional investment opportunities, but was not necessarily able to address those appropriately because he was more focused on the individual clients that he already had. And so we made the decision to merge. I would say in terms of lessons learned, I think the most important thing you can do is to have more conversations than you think necessary about how you want to manage things, what the expectations are between the two of you or multiple of you, however many people are involved. What you want your career to look like, what your time horizon is for your career, how you want to spend your time, like just having who's going to use the staff and how are they going to use it, what's the money going to look like, the financial situation and breakout going to look like, having solid legal agreements, like all of that is really important, I think, because it's just like dating or getting married. You, on some level, you're not going to know everything about the person until you're actually in a relationship with them. And, there's a little bit of settling that happens after the fact, but it's really important to understand like who you're committing to on the front end before you actually make that commitment. So what you can and should live with in terms of, how that person operates and what their practice is like as well.
Really, really great advice. And I love the analogy of it's like, it's like dating or getting married because you don't know exactly everything until you're in it. But I think it's great to kind of also be very intentional about what you actually love doing and what you don't love doing. And if you can find somebody else that loves doing the stuff that you don't, so that it's complementary. I think the other thing, right, we talk on this podcast a lot about culture and the kind of firm or the kind of culture that you want to build, making sure that that is you have similar goals and similar ways of thinking is probably another big piece of that, right? And if he
Absolutely.
reached out to you because of you were already traveling in the same circles, I think that's showing that you probably had similar mindset, right?
Definitely, definitely. And I would say, leaning on, I always make a joke that, a lot of times folks plan for things like just off of vibes, which I'm very big on intuition and I'm very big on, going with your gut, but we also have to follow up with like structure and an intentional like plan there. And sometimes that requires us leaning on other professionals. So, in our case, we've leaned on multiple professionals, one to give us a better sense of what each other's styles are. So, we have a consultant that we use for any folks that we hire in our firm that will do disc assessments. She just works with financial services. She does disc assessments for everybody, which really tells you what their thinking styles are, how they show up in the world, how they relate to other people, and she'll match that with the job description, which is a great tool if you're screening like potential employees to be able to see if they match up with what you need them to do in their job. And so we did that for the whole team upon coming together just to see kind of where everybody was and see what their natural kind of proclivities or natural gifts are so that we can make sure everyone was in the right place, but also I think the thing that it has given us most is understanding what about the other people, my partner and other folks on the team, what things they might do that would irritate us because of our natural inclinations and vice versa, or things that might just stress the other person out. So, I have one advice. I'm a very kind of flexible type of person. Like I can adapt. I will flow with what I need to do. But I have one person on my team who is extremely regimented and extremely like process oriented and operational. And she wants to ask all the questions and like really be systematic about it. And when we did the assessment, the woman told me, you are going to send her, she's like a train on the train tracks. And so if you try to make her go left when there's no track, she's not going to be able to do it. So don't try to do that and don't have that expectation of her. And so that was really helpful to me to know what she can and cannot adapt to without it being like stressful or unpleasant for everybody involved.
So I love that you mentioned disc assessments and that you use somebody outside to handle some of that stuff as like kind of the facilitator, the mediator.
Mhm.
In my prior role, I was obsessed with disc assessments. We did it for the executive leadership team, and we turned it into like our annual executive team meeting where we learned about each other, right?
Yeah.
So understanding each other's disc assessments and like, okay, Suzanne behaves this way because of this, or Mark behaves this way because of this,
Mhm.
was so helpful. So advice to advisors out there that maybe don't like that part of the job of hiring and training and understanding other people's motivations. It's so time consuming, and none of us are real experts in it. To be able to offset that or to outsource it to professionals and have an actual visual tool that helps you do it. I think that is one of the best bits of advice that I've heard on this podcast. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Really one quick thing I want to get to before we run out of time with my last line question is you're a CFP, you're an ambassador for them. So as a woman of color, how are you helping to engage more women and people of color into this profession? And what are like one or two things that those that are in the profession now can do to help with that?
Yeah. There's so much there, Suzanne, but I
That
host a
could be a whole other
monthly,
podcast, right?
totally. Like we could talk for an hour about that. Um, we host a monthly future financial advice office hours. And so that's an opportunity for anyone who is either in the business already, is a career changer, wants to go independent and really just needs a little bit of guidance and support. They can join that as well. I had mentioned this to you via email, but myself and I think 8 other Latino financial advisors started the Latino Advisor Summit, which we had the first time last year. We're going to have the second time this year in October. And that's really focused on keeping more Latinos in financial services. I'm a big proponent of, if you don't see it, it's hard for you to know that you can be it. For me personally, I didn't know about wealth management until it was literally flung in my lap.
Yep.
I didn't know that was a viable career path to me. I didn't know that I could be a lead advisor and build a sustainable business as a mother until I saw one of my bosses who, she was in her 50s at the time, but she had 2 kids and she had a great loving marriage, and she was incredibly successful, like one of the top 10 advisors in RBC. That was an eye-opening moment for me to say, like, I can do that. And so for any advisor that's listening, or someone who's, in charge of hiring in some form or fashion, I really want you to think about the examples that you are giving to the next generation of talent that we have coming up. And are those reflected? And this is not to like try and bend yourself into a pretzel over trying to have every single type of person reflected in your firm. While that would be nice, it's really looking around and saying, oh, there are some glaring holes here in terms of our representation. And the problem is that a lot of, folks who are marginalized or come from marginalized communities, they're not going to, some of them won't apply to your firm or to your job if they go to the website and they see that everyone is a middle-aged man that is, a middle-aged white man from the same area and with the same pedigree and a very similar background. Like, they are not going to necessarily feel comfortable. I know there were many times, I'm a little bit of an oddball, but there were many times when I was the only woman in the room, certainly the only woman of color. And I was okay with that, mostly because I had a purpose, and that was to increase my own knowledge and my own understanding. But not everybody is going to have that level of comfort for lots of different reasons that I don't want to get into. But it's going to be really important to be mindful of it and recognize that that associate or that admin assistant or that, client service associate that you bring in, investment analyst, like first year investment associate that you bring in, needs a clear path to get to where they're trying to get to.
Yeah, that is, I just was on a panel talking about this topic at a women's event. And one of the women speakers, she works at Ariel Investments, and she was saying, it's great. We focus a lot on recruitment of underrepresented groups into the industry, but you better have a clear training program, clear, path for success. And, we can't just end it with just, okay, we got underrepresented groups here. Now, like, what are we doing to support those groups while they're here? So I think that is a really
So important.
yeah, that's a really important piece to highlight.
Yeah,
Well,
because I'm sorry to interrupt, Suzanne, but like we see a lot of times that there's a lot of entry level, like diverse entry level folks, women, people of color that are brought in, but they fall off at some point in their career. They usually leave, let's say 3 to 7 years into their career. There have been all kinds of studies that have been done on financial services. And I think it's because of that lack of clear path and that lack of mentorship or that lack of training to be able to help them get into middle management and senior leadership as well.
and I think that is a great last line, quite frankly, right? So don't just pay attention if you're hiring to the recruitment piece, but also what is that career path? What is that? How are you being intentional about setting individuals up for success in your firm? Again, just such an important piece to make sure that we reiterate and get out there into this profession. It's a great profession, and I am glad that you're in it, Anna. So
Thank
I'm
you.
glad that we met on the plane that one time, which is a whole other
Exactly.
podcast, right? Um, so, so again, thank you so much for being my guest today and for sharing your experiences, both personal and professional, and your many best practices and advice to help firms get to that next level. I'm Suzanne Siracuse. Thanks for listening. And I hope this episode leaves you feeling even more excited to be focused on the future.